If you are watching this video right now, look closely at the screen. You are not looking at a story. You are looking at a summons. Chapter 1. The Petitions of the Dead. This is the fortress of Firoz Shah Kotla in Delhi. It is an active, functioning court of law, ruled entirely by jinns. Every Thursday, thousands of people submit formal legal complaints and passport copies directly to an invisible cabinet of spirits. Skeptical journalist Kabir went there to expose this as a psychological hoax. He walked deep into the dark, soot-stained underground tunnels, flashlight cutting through the suffocating blackness. He thought he was just an observer. He had no idea the court had already opened a case file on his bloodline. His flashlight flickered violently. The batteries were dying. The air around him turned ice-cold and completely still. And then the exit doors behind him slammed shut with a thunderous, final, bone-rattling crash. Kabir pressed his back against the cold stone wall. His phone had no signal. He was completely, utterly alone. Then his flashlight beam landed on something that made every nerve in his body go completely numb. Glued to the ancient stone wall was a fresh photocopy of an Indian national identification card. His identification card. His own face, his own address, his own name, filed as evidence in a court he had come to mock. From deep within the tunnel, a low, resonant hum began vibrating through the stone floor beneath his feet. Two sulfur-yellow slit eyes ignited in the darkness at the far end of the tunnel. Ancient, enormous, watching. Lathwale Baba, the ancient jinn lord of this court. And Kabir had just been formally summoned before him. Kabir's silver signet ring burned hot against his finger. Someone had put his name on that wall deliberately. Someone who knew him. The case was already open. The verdict was already written. And Kabir had walked straight into the courtroom. You cannot run from a subpoena issued by the unseen. Once your name enters their record, every door you try to open will lock from the outside. Chapter 2. The Emergency Files. Why would an ancient entity have Kabir's modern identification? To find out, he had to break into the restricted police archives of 1977. During the brutal forced demolitions of the Delhi emergency, hundreds of families vanished completely from the city records. They did not flee. A rogue mystic personally brought them directly to these ancient ruins to sign a dark and binding pact with something far older than India itself. A shadow government hidden beneath the ruins promised these desperate families dark justice in exchange for something deeply terrible. But that dark justice required a continuing lineage of blood sacrifices to keep the invisible court permanently in session. Kabir rifled through crumbling yellowed pages, his dark eyes scanning frantically until his blood ran completely cold. He just found his own grandfather's signature on the original 1977 treaty, binding their bloodline to this ancient, terrible court forever. The pact was not symbolic. It was a living contract, and every generation of his family had unknowingly been feeding the court its due. And tonight, the debt had finally matured. The Chief Justice of this invisible court was already moving through the city toward him. Kabir sprinted through the archive corridors, his boots echoing on cold stone floors, every shadow behind him seeming to breathe and follow. Outside, the ancient blind caretaker of Firoz Shah Kotla waited calmly, his clouded white eyes already knowing exactly what was coming next. The old man spoke without turning, his voice barely above a whisper, telling Kabir the pillar had already begun to glow with heat from within. Kabir looked up at the towering Ashokan pillar rising from the pyramid ruins, and saw the stone surface shimmering with impossible internal heat. Then the air itself split open. A colossal mass of smokeless fire and shifting black heat haze rose directly behind the ancient pillar, towering over everything. Kabir stood frozen, the silver ring on his finger burning hot against his skin, as two sulfur-yellow eyes locked directly, deliberately, onto his face. The court was now in session, and Kabir was the only living heir left to answer for a debt signed in blood 50 years ago. Never spy on a court that doesn't use human law. If you break their silence, the physical world around you will begin to curdle. Chapter 3. The Price of Justice. The caretakers of the fort know the rules. If you write a letter to the jinns, you enter a binding celestial contract. You cannot compromise. And most importantly, you can never spy on the court after the gates lock. Kabir ignored the warning. He left a hidden night vision camera facing the main altar and hid in the shadows. But exactly at midnight, reality began to glitch. The white milk left as an offering didn't spill. It violently curdled into black calligrapher's ink, crawling up the stone walls like a living parasite. The jinns knew they were being recorded. Every shadow in that hall shifted simultaneously. Kabir pressed himself against the cold stone, his knuckles white around the camera, heart hammering violently. The caretaker had warned him. Some courts punish witnesses more severely than the accused themselves. The altar flame extinguished itself without wind. A deep, resonant silence swallowed the entire fort whole. Then the ink stopped moving. Everything froze. And two sulfur-yellow eyes opened directly toward the camera lens. Kabir's camera screen cracked from the inside. No impact, no drop. Just internal fracture from pure celestial pressure. He ran. But the fort's corridors kept rearranging themselves, looping him back to the same altar repeatedly. The caretaker found him at dawn, collapsed at the altar steps, camera completely melted beyond recognition. Kabir survived. But 3 fingernails on his right hand had turned permanently black overnight, inexplicably. The jinn court had marked him, not as an enemy, as a permanent debtor who owed celestial dues. The price of spying on divine justice is never immediate. It accumulates silently like ink soaking through stone. This is not visual interference. This is what happens when a digital camera records an entity made of smokeless fire. Chapter 4. The court is in session. This is the actual video file Kabir retrieved from the vault. Look closely at the screen. The underground chamber is completely empty, yet thousands of paper letters are tearing themselves off the walls simultaneously. Watch the center of the night vision frame. The solid stone begins to liquefy into heat haze. A shape made of smokeless fire stretches out, turning its face directly toward the lens. Kabir panicked, grabbed his camera, and locked himself inside his apartment miles away. But when he hit play on his laptop, he realized the entity wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking through it. It was tracking his coordinates. The entity stretched its elongated shadow across the corrupted digital playback footage. Behind Kabir, unseen, the stone wall of his apartment began to crack and split open. The massive shadow silhouette of Lathwale Baba reached directly out from that crack. Kabir sat completely unaware, eyes locked on the corrupted footage playing before him. The screen reflection showed what was standing inches behind his chair. Every paper letter from the vault had been addressed to one single name. His name. The court had been waiting, and now the session had finally begun. The door to his room just clicked open on its own. You think you are safe because you are just watching a screen? Once you understand their court, your name is automatically added to the docket. Chapter 5. The Unresolved Case. They found Kabir the next morning. He was sitting on his floor, staring blankly into the corner of an empty room. He was completely unharmed, except for one devastating detail that nobody could explain. His fingers were permanently stained with heavy black soot that cannot be washed off, the physical mark of the jinn's ink. Kabir never spoke again. The silence inside him was heavier than any wound visible to the human eye. Because once the unseen government opens a file on your bloodline, the case is never closed. If you ever visit the ruins of Firoz Shah Kotla on a Thursday, do not touch the letters. Do not look into the alcoves. Whatever waits inside them has already seen you first. And if you hear whispers rising from the dark corners around you, do not look back. Because your file is already open. It has been open since long before you were even born. The ancient court does not forget. Every soul that crosses its threshold leaves a permanent mark behind. Kabir's case was sealed in their records the moment his hands touched what was never meant to be touched. The caretaker had warned him. The old blind man had known this ending long before it arrived. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Some names are not meant to be spoken aloud in certain places. Ladi Shah understood this truth in the late 1970s and carried that terrible knowledge silently to his grave. The screen you are watching right now is thinner than you think. The boundary between their world and yours is paper thin. The case is never closed. The file is already open, and now, so are those eyes.